Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have Jill Wine-Banks with us today. We'll chat with Jill in just a second, but first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please follow or subscribe and rate and review, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. Well, here's some feedback we received this week. On our conversation with the Brat Pack's Andrew McCarthy, Randy Shine writes, I thoroughly enjoyed Brats. Good for Andrew McCarthy for doing that film. And Brown Smith writes, I just watched this a couple of days ago. It is so good. Brought back so many high school memories. I loved it. All right, let's get to our big things of the week. And don't forget, stick around later for another exciting episode of Just Jeff. So we had two very consequential court rulings come down late yesterday. One was the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals rejected Donald Trump and his co-defendants' request to block the government's release of Special Counsel Jack Smith's January 6th report. And the United States Supreme Court rejected Trump's request to delay the sentencing that was scheduled for this morning, which did take place. We'll talk about that in a second, to delay that sentencing in the New York hush money case. I don't know. These are promising signs on some level that the court system in this country will continue to respect the rule of law and the Constitution. So Amy Coney Barrett and John Roberts joined with the three liberal justices for a 5-4 decision. And look, we got to take what we can get, right? 5-4 is 5-4 is 5-4.
Absolutely.
Yes, this is the classic glass half full, glass half empty discussion.
Backroom discussion.
Wait, let's guess who's going to take which side.
I'll go with the glass half
Debbie.
empty. No, I mean,
Ms. Downer.
It's depressing. We all know Alito and Thomas are going to go along with anything that's pro-Trump. But it's depressing that we can't think that Kavanaugh or Gorsuch could do the same. Not surprising, but still depressing. So 5-4 on something that is such an unbelievable slam dunk that they shouldn't be interfering with a state court is phenomenal that it's that close.
Yeah, but I look at it this way. We're not living in a perfect world. I certainly agree with you, but we got to take our victories when and where we can get them. But more importantly, it is an indication that Donald Trump doesn't have a free pass. It's not going to be a pretty picture these next 4 years. But I think there are reasons to hold out hope. There are reasons to be optimistic. I think these two court rulings are a sign of something.
I would just say two quick things. One, on the most consequential cases, they seem to come down on the wrong side. And so these are little victories, but the big losses are immunity, are the Chevron, are the things that are devastating for the future. So while I agree with you, the democracy is not dead, it's on a precipitous decline.
Well, only time is going to tell. And all I'm saying is I'm not going to predict what will or will not happen. I'm going to wait to see what happens and base my concerns or my fears or my optimism on what actually is happening. So judging from these two rulings, which have denied Trump two things that he really wanted, he is going to enter the Oval Office as a convicted felon. That is huge for Donald Trump, and that is the only reason he fought like an animal to delay this sentencing. And the January 6th report is going to clearly lay out exactly what happened leading up to and on January 6, 2021. And Donald Trump doesn't want that either. So I think this is a win for the rule of law. It's a win for the Constitution, and it's a win for the American people. And until I stop seeing wins like that, I'm going to say it's a positive sign.
Okay.
Yes, it definitely looks like a positive sign. And if we're staying very narrow in those parameters, then it is a good sign. We're all very worried. So any wins are an important step in the right direction and keeping us positive and motivating us to stay strong and focused on the prize at the end of the next, let's just say, 2 years of what could be different.
Yeah, well, that's it. That's the point. That is the point, because we all in this country have two choices. We can look in the past or we can look forward. And we have an election coming up in less than 2 years, and then another one after that 2 years later. And what's happening right now, what we've seen so far since November, from Trump himself to the chaos on his team and his incoming administration, actions by the U.S. Senate, chaos in the House, these two court rulings, there's an opportunity here. There's an opportunity to focus on that, capitalize on that, and do whatever we need to do to win in November of 2026. Because if everybody just stands around going, oh my God, it's worse, this was never have, the court's never going to do this, the House is never going to do this, Senate's never going to do that, Trump's going to get away with everyone, blah, 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 blah. People are just going to tune the fuck out. And then, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. We are seeing daylight, and that's really important. That's an important point.
Until the 100 executive orders
Starting at
come out.
1 p.m. on January 20th.
You see, we got to stay away from that. I want to be in this room with you guys the day that happens. And then you will say to me, oh my God, look what he did.
Wait,
okay.
Are we going to be here January 20th? Because I think that'll be the day it happens.
We'll be here on or about. And then we get to talk about what he actually did. I'm not spending any of my mental energy or my political capital or podcast capital being a Debbie Downer and saying, oh my God, he's going to do this and he's going to do that. And oh my God, we're in. I look at this like he is in a leadership position and he has filled his administration, whoever they end up being, with incompetence. And my instincts tell me you can't get much done when you do that. And so far, we have not seen everyone bow down to the king. We saw the Senate with Matt Gaetz. We saw the chaos in the House, the very fractured House. And by the way, we saw it in the Senate with them making their majority leader not the guy that Donald Trump wanted, not the MAGA guy, okay? John Thune is not MAGA. So we see what's going on in the House, and now we see what's going on in the courts. So let's just ride with that. Let's just see where this goes. We got to talk about the fires for a second because I don't want to ignore that. It's just horrific what's happening in Los Angeles. But I hope when there's an opportunity, once the fires are out, that people will look at climate change more seriously. We have the most devastating hurricanes, tornadoes, droughts, fires that we ever seen. The hottest 10 years in the country are the last 10 years. It's not a red or blue issue, people. This is about our survival, literally. We are watching it on TV. It's about our survival. And today, it's fires in LA. Tomorrow, it's another massive hurricane that floods lower Manhattan and destroys the city and kills people, or massive tornadoes down south, or killer hurricanes in North Carolina and Florida and elsewhere. I know there are people that are trying to make this a political thing. It's Governor Newsom's fault. It's the mayor's fault. It's Mother Nature. It's Mother Nature saying, you've been fucking with me. And what do you expect? So we better start paying attention, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't agree more. But if you want to make a difference, this is something that we talked about for the last year, then people have to vote for what's important for them. And climate change, I guess, is really not at the top of people's lists. They wouldn't have voted for the person who wants to take every ounce of land that we have and drill, baby, drill.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. I mean, I think the climate change is a hoax people who voted for a climate change is a hoax president, who supports a climate change is a hoax party, and gave them control of everything. I really hope people at some point wake up and realize it's not just about eggs. It's about my house can burn down. My roof can blow off. My neighborhood could flood. I mean, we're dealing with some serious shit here.
And the policies in place to try to mitigate that were happening under the current administration and will not continue under this one.
I think it's
not that I have a crystal ball.
There's two parties, but there's only one that actually gives a shit about climate change. And, we all drink the same water. We all breathe the same air. This shit's not political. It's not a partisan issue. Your house burns down. You think these wildfires are like, hey, guys, which way should we blow? This is a Democratic neighborhood. Or that's our house owned by a Republican. Let's save that one. You think that's what's happening in L.A. right now?
Unfortunately, this is totally politicized, and Trump in the previous administration showed that he would hold funding for anyone he didn't like, and that even included Georgia because they didn't agree with his winning the election. So we're going to see more of the same, and this type of disaster, unfortunately, is going to be taken advantage of. There's a lot of issues around this, but no matter what the real issues are, they're going to be simplified and made up, basically, because there's no truth to anything.
Yeah, well, I agree with that. I mean, how many school kids need to be shot dead? You would think that would rally people around gun reform, but it doesn't, because people are very entrenched in their political beliefs. Doesn't matter if it impacts negatively their own self-interests, the lives of their children, their homes. It's just bizarre. I don't understand it. I don't think there's going to be a quick fix. All I'm saying is there really should be, because it's getting worse. The catastrophic weather disasters in this country, it's unbelievable what's happening in the last couple of decades. All right, let's get to our winners and losers.
My winner, Jimmy Carter's grandson, Jason. His eulogy of President Carter described his legacy of love, faith, climate change warrior, proponent of legalization of marijuana, and near eradication of guinea worm disease, essentially by neighbors talking to neighbors about how to collect water in the poorest and most marginalized villages in the world. My loser, Trump, for his intentional lies surrounding the cause and response to the California wildfires.
My loser is tech bro Mark Zuckerberg, who has never shown an ounce of humility or humanity. He gave a servile performance announcing his intent to eliminate fact-checking on Meta, and is now reported that he will allow users to say that LGBTQ plus people have a mental illness. My winner is Judge Merchan, who has managed to be one of the very few people to hold Trump accountable. While he's avoided jail or any other normal punishment, the symbolic importance can't be overstated of Trump having the status of a felon and entering the White House.
My winner, Georgia Federal Court Judge Aileen Cannon, who all but guaranteed her future appointment to the United States Supreme Court, with her injunction this week halting release of the Jack Smith J6 report. My loser, Judge Aileen Cannon, who cemented her place in history as perhaps the most conflicted, biased, co-opted federal judge, and who was overruled yet again by the 11th Circuit. That gets us to the weekly rant. When I referred to myself as Optimistic Andy several weeks back, it was because I clung to the belief that the United States judicial system would serve as the critical check on incoming President Donald Trump, continuing for the most part to uphold the rule of law and the Constitution. And given critical decisions late Thursday by both the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals and the United States Supreme Court, there is reason to be optimistic these next 4 years that our democracy is not going to die. The federal courts, as they have done for many years now, as evidenced by the 60-plus rulings against Trump, will likely continue to weigh the evidence and do the right thing. Even the Supreme Court just gave some assurance that its own immunity ruling, a horrible decision so vague and incomplete, does not mean Trump can do whatever the hell he wants. I'm not saying we're headed for smooth sailing. We have a fuck ton to be concerned about with Trump 2.0, from Trump's own autocratic wet dreams to the draconian policies of Project 2025 and its evil creators, and all the greedy, power-hungry, cowardly Trump sycophants in between. They are all going to continue to test the system like never before. And I believe we're in for some very rough waters. But what I am saying is I refuse to believe that our courts are ultimately going to let Donald Trump turn the United States of America into Russia, despite his unrelenting attempts to do just that. But let's be very clear. It wasn't the courts who failed us. It was the 77 million people who voted for Trump. They're the reason he's at the controls and why our democracy is at risk. But back to optimism. There's 3 things that give us reason to hope that our worst fears may not be realized. The first being the courts. Next is the possibility that incoming Senate Majority Leader John Thune and Republicans will also stand up to Trump on some level and not just rubber stamp whatever unconstitutional lunacy he sends them. We've already seen that occur during the Matt Gaetz saga, and whether or not they confirm Trump's other outrageous cabinet nominations is an important litmus test that's coming up soon. And lastly, as we've seen these last few weeks, Trump and his incoming administration of utter incompetence may be the gang that can't shoot straight. The odds are we're going to see lots of chaos, infighting, back and front stabbing, and ultimately a very ugly public Trump-Musk divorce, making it very difficult for them to actually get things done, especially with a very fractured 1-seat margin in the House. So the moral of this story is, it ain't over till the fat man in the Oval Office sings. There's a midterm election coming up in less than 2 years, which would be a total game changer if Democrats can retake the House and Senate. And then just 2 years after that, another presidential election where the whole damn thing can change. So I urge you to put down your Donald Trump vomit bags, stop all the woe is me Debbie Downer bullshit, and fight the fight that you fought in 2020. Now is not the time to throw in the emotional towel. Now is the time to take the fight directly to Trump, wherever it needs to go. Because if we play this game right, we can win it all. All right, let's get to Jill Wine-Banks. She is an attorney, author, speaker, MSNBC Legal Analyst, and co-host of the award-winning #Sisters-in-Law podcast. She also hosts the YouTube show, Just the Facts. Her 2020 memoir is The Watergate Girl, My Fight for Truth and Justice Against a Criminal President, about her life and work as a Watergate prosecutor, and a film adaptation of the book is in discussion. Jill is a frequent op-ed contributor to various publications, including the Chicago Tribune, the Washington Post, and Politico, and she's also appeared in films including Watergate, or How We Learned to Stop an Out-of-Control President, All the President's Men Revisited, and Fahrenheit 11/9. Jill, welcome into the back room.
Thank you, Andy. I'm very excited to meet you sort of in person, to the extent that Zoom is today's equivalent of in person.
Likewise, I'm a big fan. I listen to the Sisters-in-Law podcast. Kimberly's been on a few times, and it's an honor to talk with you. So we were talking before we started, because the breaking situation today is the funeral of Jimmy Carter, and there's been a lot of interesting visuals at the beginning of this. So what did you observe from that?
Well, as an overarching matter, I think what I see is the decency of Jimmy Carter and the contrast to the presence of the president-elect, who's there as the former president. And think about the fact that today we buried a great man, a decent man, a man of honesty. And tomorrow, the former president will be sentenced. I believe it is true that there is an appeal to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is not a reliable institution anymore. But even as unreliable as they have been, I believe they will not violate the law and stop the sentencing. I believe he will be sentenced tomorrow. So you have this contrast between the incoming president, who will be a convicted felon at his inauguration, and this very honest, decent man being buried today, and sitting next to Joe Biden, another man of humility and decency. So that contrast just weighed on me. I was very touched when President Biden spoke, not only by his words, but by the fact that he trailed his hand on the casket over the flag, paying a real tribute that I found emotional.
You speak of the contrast, and it is truly stunning, and we've seen it all week. But with regard to the funeral today, Barack Obama was sitting right next to Trump, and they were engaged in conversation, And at the beginning, I kind of was like, well, Barack is, he's tolerating it. But then at one point, he's cracking up, and it's like, what are they talking about? What could possibly have Trump said to him that literally made Obama bust out laughing? It's like, we're living in an alternate universe, aren't we?
Yes. And I do wonder, and it was one of those times where during the Watergate trial, Jim Neal, who was one of my partners, his secretary read lips. And I was thinking, oh, if only Donna were here to tell us what they were saying. And I'm sure someday, probably today, we will find out what they were talking about because it was so obvious. It was also obvious, by the way, that Melania and Donald had not one word exchanged between them.
Wait, are you suggesting they have marital problems?
I would never judge anyone else's marriage, but possibly there is.
Yeah, I noticed that too, but I've noticed that for years. I remember when she would swat his hand away, and I used to find that so entertaining. And so, yeah, we saw the contrast earlier this week where at the memorial at this Capitol Rotunda, and Donald Trump was giving his quote-unquote presser, and he's just bashing Jimmy Carter. And I was watching this horror in Los Angeles taking place with these devastating fires. And we've seen Trump's truly reprehensible behavior in dealing with yet another catastrophic disaster. And that's when it all hit home for me. It's like, we are in for quite a ride these next 4 years, aren't we?
It is almost inconceivable. When you mention the fires, which are, my heart goes out to the thousands of people who have lost everything, and to the friends that I have there who are in harm's way with go bags packed.
Yep, me too.
Animals, dogs and chickens, that they will need to move should the fire not be contained. And seeing President Biden and his promise to help, and then hearing the ugly, improper, inappropriate, wrongful comments of President-elect Trump attacking with absolutely no basis and totally without fact Governor Newsom, calling him Governor New Scum, and blaming him for what is clearly climate change, while he, Donald Trump, plans to eliminate all the protections that have been put in place to reverse or at least slow down climate change before we are all affected. Chicago has had virtually no snow this year and very little cold, no really sub-zero temperatures, while California is burning, no remittance of the temperature, no rain to stop this, while the South is expecting huge snowstorms, while you saw the funeral today in a snowy Washington, D.C. We must recognize that there is climate change that we must deal with, and we must help the states to implement policies and have the money to help those who are destroyed. Insurance companies won't insure homes in fire areas of California anymore. So people who have lost things don't have insurance anymore. I mean, this is a really tragic, seeing the flames, and just imagine how it's spreading. You look out your window and know that you have 10 minutes to escape. And as you say, the contrast between President Biden and the incoming president are shocking. And I don't think many of the people in California voted for Donald Trump, but some of them did. And certainly around the world they did. And when the snow comes and your roof collapses in the South, don't expect help unless you're in a red state.
Yeah, I have good friends out there. My friends Liz and Nathan live in Santa Monica, and they have chickens in the backyard, and they're literally the people you described. She said something yesterday, thank God Biden is still president, at least for the next 2 weeks, because we've seen how Trump deals with this stuff, the throwing of the paper towels in Puerto Rico, the changing of the weather maps with his own marker. Like, we just have to hope and pray that we don't have another COVID, another major catastrophe, because he is so ill-equipped to handle that, especially with his cabinet that will be coming in. A health crisis with Bobby Kennedy if he makes it past the FBI background checks.
This cabinet, it's hard to pick who is the worst and how many the Senate will have the courage to stand up against. Will it be Kennedy? Will it be Tulsi Gabbard? Will it be Hegseth, one of my personal favorites to make sure it doesn't happen? I served in the Pentagon. I know what's involved. And he is ill-equipped, both by policy, that is, no women in combat, for example, but also by management. It is the largest federal agency in terms of number of employees, in terms of budget. He was fired from 2 not-for-profit small groups because he couldn't manage their budgets. How can we possibly let him manage the Pentagon? It is outrageous. He was a low-level officer who will not have the respect of generals and doesn't deserve their respect. Not because he was a major, but because he's ill-equipped.
Do you think the FBI background checks is going to be the thing that prevents one or more of them from being confirmed?
I don't think you can predict what this new Congress, under the control of Donald Trump, will do. They seem totally cowed by him, as do corporate America. I mean, people that you would have never expected to bend a knee are now saying, oh, Facebook, no more fact-checking. Here's money.
Well, that's the crazy thing. It's the professional fact checkers are politically biased, but the people, the community, they're not. So we're gonna let them do the fact. Right. I mean, it's just so bizarre to me.
It makes zero sense, and it is dangerous. The reason I started the YouTube show, Just the Facts, is because we are living in alternate universes, and there is only one set of facts. Mm-hmm. But if you don't use the same channels of communication, you don't know that. People who are watching Fox actually believe that the election was stolen last time. Oh, but it went fairly this time because he won. They believe things that just aren't true. When he talks about it's all Governor Newsom's fault, they believe that, where there's no fact basis for any of the things he says. When he talks about the Panama Canal, let's link again, President Carter and his remarks. I was general counsel of the Army and the Panama Canal Corporation during the negotiations for that treaty. He doesn't know what he's talking about, that he, being Donald Trump, doesn't know. When he says, well, Jimmy Carter should never have given it back. We didn't have it. We had a 100-year lease, which expired. That means it's not ours. And by negotiating this new treaty, he was able to, instead of walking away with nothing, to get things like priority passage for our naval ships in time of need. We are not being charged more than any other country. Fewer ships are going through because of climate change. The lake that feeds the water to allow the ships to pass is drying up, and so they cannot handle as many ships now as they were in the past. We need to deal with climate change and help that, but no one is being discriminated against. Mm-hmm. There's no special tariff for America versus China. That isn't happening. So he just makes things up.
Well, but what you're hitting on is his MO for everything. He yes. has to have the other side. That's the enemy. We're the victim. We're getting screwed over. Everything's unfair. And it's like textbook autocratic strategy to rally the dumbed down masses to believe this stuff, to believe this gaslighting. But what I don't understand is the media's covering the Panama thing, the Greenland thing, the Canada annexation.
Gulf of America.
They're covering it with, like, before the election, everybody was talking about how he's flirting with Nazism. He's going to be an autocrat. Democracy's in trouble. Now we're literally seeing him say to the world, I'm just going to go into sovereign nations, potentially using the U.S. military, and
To
take
a NATO
them.
ally.
And
Denmark
take them.
is a NATO ally.
Yeah. And now his surrogates are like, well, but these are strategically important to the United States. It's like, my neighbor's jacuzzi would enhance my property value, but I don't have a right to go take it, right? Like, why isn't anyone saying this is insanity? You don't just get to invade Greenland or Panama because you think it's important to you, whether it's your national security or anything.
Well, it isn't national security, of course. Greenland is part of a NATO ally.
Mm-hmm.
We have access. This is not an issue, but it is scary, and we need to remind people that he did say he wouldn't use military force against Canada to make it our 51st state.
Right.
But he did say he would, or at least he didn't rule out that he would use it in Greenland.
Right.
So, and Panama. So this is very frightening to me that might happen.
Because that's a boundary that once that's crossed, then you're no
Yes.
different than any dictator throughout history, Hitler marching through Europe. Like, I mean, when I watch the news and I see some of the anchors asking questions like, so how would Trump actually go about taking over Greenland? I'm like, oh my God, please stop. Like, why are we discussing this like this is a normal situation?
This is no different than the invasion of Ukraine by Putin.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just say, we're going to ignore what the basic premise of NATO is, which is we will protect sovereign borders and we will not enlarge our territory by war. And that's what, that's what Putin is doing, why it's so wrong. And can we count on President Trump to continue to protect the independence of Ukraine? I don't think so. He is so enamored with Putin, probably because he loves the power that Putin has, and he wants that same thing for himself. Mm-hmm. And now, you mentioned the cabinet that's possible. There's no one there who's going to say no. Tulsi Gabbard, she's not going to tell him what reality is. That's absurd, and that's an important omission. Hegseth will carry out whatever war he wants to do. Will the generals be able to refuse unlawful orders? And how will you know that it's an unlawful order? It's very frightening to me.
Yeah. Well, the parallels to Russia, as you mentioned, are startling in other ways. I mean, look at the oligarchy that's being created here in this country. I mean, we always had billionaires and rich people involved in politics, but it was always like in the stands. If this was a football game, it's never like on the sidelines calling the plays. And we're entering uncharted waters, and it is
I mean, think
terrifying.
about Elon Musk and his being joined at the hip with Donald Trump.
But how long do you think that lasts?
Sitting at Mar-a-Lago. I'm surprised it's not over already, because Donald Trump doesn't like someone who gets the attention away from him. And Elon Musk is definitely doing that. So I don't know what Elon Musk has on him. It can't just be the amount of money that he donated.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know. I mean, what do you think? How long will it last?
Well, I agree with you that it's amazing to me that it's gone this far. I agree that I don't think it's money, because whenever I try to analyze Trump's moves, I've stopped doing it as me, because me thinks with logic and rational thought, critical thinking, whatever. I have to think about it from his perspective. So I try to get in his head, and he's a sociopath, and he only thinks about what's 5 seconds in front of him. So that's why other people who have either had a lot of power, a lot of money, it doesn't matter. He's not loyal to anyone. So this would be historic if he stayed loyal to Musk. I just don't see it going longer than a few months, because to your point about attention, I mean, he's sitting around this week watching Jimmy Carter's memorial. He's watching Jimmy Carter's funeral. He's watching the fires. And this sociopath has one thought in his head. What can I do to get the attention back on me?
Well, he also has in mind, he's angry that flags will be at half-mast during the inauguration because of honoring Jimmy Carter.
Yeah. So
I mean, really, that's what he's concerned about?
So that's why when you say, like, when we talk about Musk, it's like, it's not in his DNA to share the spotlight. Just look at when he said, I'm the president and he can't be the president because he's not even a citizen. Like, he thought about it, right? He had spent time on this because he was tired of hearing people say, President Musk, President Musk. So it doesn't matter how much money, it doesn't matter how much power Musk has, it doesn't matter to me about Twitter. It's how long will Trump be able to, like, bite his lip and share that enormous spotlight? And I personally, for me, the answer to the question is not very long.
Yeah, and remember his history of turnover in his cabinet.
Yes.
One little thing you do that doesn't suit him, and you're gone. He fires you. And sometimes it's not even that you did anything. Who knows? I mean, we can go back to, was Comey his first, I think, firing? I think it was. And then you go from there, and it's just, it's an unstable situation. Although this time he's picking people who are blindly loyal and who I fear will do exactly what he's asking them to do. And as a result, there will be no guardrails the way there were in the first administration.
Well, let me ask you this. You have an incredible background in the law. Someone like Pam Bondi, Dave Ehrenberg, I'm sure you know the name, former prosecutor down in Florida, worked in her office when she was Attorney General. He said she has a lot of respect for the rule of law. I support this. I'm not worried at all. Someone like her, in your opinion, is she the type of person to just rubber stamp the autocracy and the lunacy?
I don't know her personally. I know some of the things she did. She got money from him and then didn't do something that she might otherwise have done. So she's compromised in my view. But of all the cabinet people, she's probably more qualified than, well, she's certainly more qualified than Matt Gaetz was, but more qualified than some of the people I've already mentioned. So I'm not going to get too hysterical about her. And I don't know whether, I mean, under the Project 2025, and let's not ignore all the things that are in there, Project 2025 includes basically total control of the Department of Justice by the president directly. And so if you have to follow the orders, I mean, go back to the Saturday Night Massacre when Nixon ordered the Attorney General to fire the special prosecutor. And the Attorney General said, my oath included only firing him for cause. And there's no cause, I'm not doing it. So he got fired. The Deputy Attorney General became the acting, and he said, I can't do it either. I don't see any cause, and I promised that I would not do it except for cause. And then he got fired. And then the Solicitor General became the acting, who said, well, I didn't make that promise, so I'll fire him. That's where I think we are now. We're at that level where the orders will be followed. I think that the post-Watergate rules that set up that the president, that the White House counsel, no one from the White House would have direct contact. It's one thing for the president to set policy and to say, I think the resources of the Department of Justice should be used to fight climate. Obviously, that won't happen in this administration. But just for example, you can pick something where you want to put more money in the budget of the lands division, the environmental controls. But you can't say, and you will prosecute the following people. That's not what happens. It's not what should happen. And of course, we didn't mention Kash Patel at the FBI and his enemies list and his promise to take action to punish anyone he doesn't like. These are not the people you want running the government and being in positions where they can do that. So I've heard from many people in the Department of Justice who are wondering if they should quit before they're fired or transferred to other places or prohibited from doing things. And it's a tough question. We faced that when Archie Cox, the special prosecutor, was fired, whether we should stay and fight or whether we should resign and protest. And we decided that as long as we could continue the investigation, that we should stay. And it turned out the public supported us and we were able to do that. So we were right to stay. I don't know if I were in the Department of Justice now, whether I would be staying. I certainly would stay until it became obvious that things had gone the way they might seem to be going now. But at some point, I think there has to be a mass exodus. And then, of course, all the people who they want to hire will be hired, and then there'll be no pushback. So maybe even then you shouldn't leave. It's a very tough question right now.
And so, you know, I've had people on this podcast who said, like, I've never felt afraid to just speak, and I feel afraid to speak my mind now. Is that a real fear that people should have, or are we all just getting a little too hyperbolic in this situation?
Should they have it? It probably is reasonable to have, but they shouldn't in America have to have that. And I think a lot of people are afraid of speaking up and out. I don't think that the courts can handle what might be coming in a way that will have bad consequences. I think there are enough judges of decency that will follow the rule of law. And so I'm not giving up hope yet. And, you know, we'll have to see. I don't know at what point, for example, you mentioned the Supreme Court, and I apologize. My dog is going to start barking momentarily. Maybe not. I think, I don't know how many more cases I can take where they ignore the law. If they stop the sentencing of Donald Trump tomorrow, that may be it for me. I'm not going to give up. When Vice President Harris lost the election, like many Americans, I went, I'm done. No more politics. I'm not going to, that's it. I'm done. I'm just going away. And then a few days later, and partly my husband is a Buddhist, and his Zen master sent me some encouraging readings from Buddhist texts. I realized that I can't leave while I still have a voice, because otherwise they get exactly what they want. Yeah. And this also goes back to Archie Cox's advice to the staff when we were talking about should we resign and protest. And he said, no, as long as you can keep on working, don't give him what he wants, which is to lose all the knowledge that you all have. You're the ones who are prepared to proceed. You must stay. And so I decided I had to do what I can. And, you know, in little ways, raising money for the Wisconsin Dems, because there's a very crucial Supreme Court election in April. And the advances that have made in stopping gerrymandering that happened because the last election was won by a Democrat and changed the majority are important. And if the Democrats lose this seat, that will all be undone. So in little ways, I think we all have to keep working and finding the fights that we want to fight. I advise people to all find something they really care about and get knowledgeable on that one issue. It's too overwhelming to think, I need to know Panama, I need to know Greenland, I need to know civil rights, I need to know climate, I need to know abortion. No, pick one of those. Pick any one that you're in, animal rights, whatever it is, book banning. Pick one, get knowledgeable enough so that you can actually have some input on what needs to be done, so that you could maybe talk to one Trumper about one issue and have a respectful conversation with that person and try to change the mind of one person. That's how we will do this, one by one by one. And so I'm not giving up, no matter what. But I may give up on the Supreme Court. I mean, this recent revelation that Donald Trump and Sam Alito, Justice Alito, had a conversation solely about recommending a former clerk of Alito's for a position as a general counsel of a department. Number one, the timing stinks. Number two, the president-elect is not someone who would be calling reference checks for a sub-cabinet position. He wouldn't even be doing it for a cabinet position. That's what transition teams do. And so it's an absurd thing, especially coming from someone who flew a January 6th flag at his summer home, especially for someone who took a trip that, I mean, we can go on and on and on, but obviously I think we have a problem. And I think obviously Justice Alito must recuse himself from anything to do with the decision on whether to stop the sentencing, a motion that was filed the day after their conversation. It just smells too bad. It looks too bad. The appearance of propriety, even if they didn't discuss it.
Yeah, well, that's never going to happen. But I want to ask you about the significance, in particular, the legal/political significance of what may come down tomorrow. From what I understand, he is not technically a convicted felon until the trial is complete, and trials are completed when they're sentencing.
It is true that technically, although he's been convicted by a jury, that it's not over until the pronouncement of a sentence, even if the sentence is no penalty, even if it is unconditional release, which means no fine, no jail, no probation, no parole, nothing, no conditions on his release. He still becomes a convicted felon, and his time to appeal starts running on that day. And it ends things. It doesn't leave things in abeyance for the next 4 years until he's no longer the president. I think it's an important step. It's an act of finality, and it is something that would happen to anyone. The arguments against him being sentenced have no merit in my mind and have been dealt with very well in the brief filed this morning. So I just don't see any possible way that the court can delay the sentencing.
Unless they're just completely, like usual, in his pocket.
I really think you can only twist things so far. And I think that we're going to see, and that goes the same for the release of the Jack Smith report, which Judge Cannon had no jurisdiction for either, certainly none for the January 6th part of the report, because that was never before her. But even as to the Mar-a-Lago part, it's not before her. It's before the 11th Circuit. So that's why they then made, oh my gosh, yes, we made a mistake. They went to the 11th Circuit. And I sort of feel like I should check my phone to see, has the 11th Circuit done anything this minute? And has the Supreme Court done anything on the sentencing? We just don't know what either of these courts is going to do. But the 11th Circuit has slapped down Judge Cannon numerous times. Yeah. So I'm hoping that they will do the same this time and say, hey, you didn't have right to do that. And that they won't then say, well, it doesn't matter because we're going to do it. I don't think that they will. I don't think that there's any grounds for it. And frankly, there's been talk that maybe the case should be dismissed by whoever will be in power right now still under President Biden, because it's clear that Donald Trump's Department of Justice is going to dismiss the case against his two remaining co-defendants. So why not dismiss it now? And then the publication becomes, who's going to object to it? It needs to happen. It should happen. It's totally appropriate. It's been done in every single special prosecution case from, well, at least since Watergate. I can't speak to whatever happened in the 100 years before that, but I think we have to trust that some courts are going to act in accordance with precedent and that they will act appropriately. But
right. Again, the problem is if it gets to the Supreme Court, they'll do what they've done in the past, which is, okay, yeah, we'll do because that's Trump's whole strategy is delay. And then all Trump needs is another, what is today, June 9th, 12 days. That's it, 12 days, and then he can take care of all of it.
You did see the court act speedily.
Sure, Colorado.
During Watergate, and when Donald Trump was kept off the ballot in Colorado.
Yeah. Then they were real quick, 4 weeks, right?
They made a decision. Exactly. They made a fast decision that, no, be on the ballot. Now, nobody raised the issue about, they said he couldn't be kept off the ballot because a primary is not run by the state. Primary is run by the political party. Well, okay, it makes clear he can't be inaugurated. He can't take the oath of office. No one raised that, and no one is raising it. And the vote has been confirmed by the, Congress. And I don't see anybody raising the issue about whether the 14th Amendment, and there's been two ways in which he has been deemed an insurrectionist. One was by the 5-day hearing in Colorado, and the other was by this impeachment, which certainly presented the evidence that he was guilty of insurrection, which means he is not eligible to serve as president.
Well, we all know that at this point, Trump is not Nixon, and America's current crisis with Trump is not Watergate. You were a member of the Watergate prosecution team. What are the critical differences between now and then that, based on what you just said, like in normal times, if this was 50 years ago, what would we be looking at? How would this be dealt with? And when would it all go away?
So we had bipartisanship in the Carter administration. We had it in Watergate era. It's gone. There is no such thing as compromise. There's no such thing as working together. Compromise is considered a bad word. We had a bipartisan support for impeachment of Richard Nixon. Members of his own party went to the White House and said, we've seen the special prosecutor's evidence. We've heard what became known as the smoking gun tape. You are guilty of obstruction. You will be convicted at a trial on the charges of impeachment that have already been voted unless you resign. And Richard Nixon resigned. We also saw that when the Supreme Court said, you have to turn over the tapes, he obeyed the rule of law and turned over the tapes, even though he had been fighting it vehemently for so long. And so it's a very different era. It's an era now where you have the vice president-elect saying, there's a lot of times when you just have to ignore the courts because they're wrong. No, you don't ignore the courts because they're wrong. That's our system. You have to get the courts changed. You have to do something to change the outcome. But ignoring court orders is not the way to go. So I think we're very different. Richard Nixon, as criminal as he was, did believe in the rule of law, and he obeyed the rule of law. And he also knew a sense of shame and resigned as a result. That is not who Donald Trump is. He will never admit that he lost the last election, the 2020 election, not the last one. The 2020 election, he will never admit that. And that's a sad state of affairs. When the decision was made not to indict Richard Nixon, against whom the evidence was more than sufficient, it was because there was a bipartisan impeachment effort underway, and the special prosecutor who replaced Archie Cox, who got fired in the Saturday Night Massacre, Leon Jaworski, said it is more appropriate to deal with a miscreant president and to deal with his crimes through the political process of impeachment rather than through a trial. I believe that was wrong, but I trusted that impeachment was a viable option. It is no longer a viable option. So the system of justice must deal with it. And if you remember, after the impeachment vote, McConnell said, we don't need it now because we have a legal system that can deal with this. Mm-hmm. Well, we don't.
Yeah.
You saw, as you said, he's avoided accountability by every means possible. Delay. A shocking Supreme Court decision giving him immunity that is wholly made up, doesn't have any precedent, and is totally wrong. And extending it not just to he has immunity, but you can't use evidence of an official act to show that an unofficial act had bad motive. Well, that's ridiculous. So I'm not optimistic about the Supreme Court, but I am hopeful that they will do the right thing and that they won't interfere with the sentencing, that they won't interfere with the release of the report. It will become part of the archives no matter what, so that it will be preserved and can't just be destroyed, even though that would be the preference, I am sure, of the incoming president.
It just seems like the key differences from 50 years ago is back then, like you're right, it was bipartisanship, but even more importantly, it was love of country. And today it's love of money, love of power, love of self, right? That's the critical difference. What do you say to the people, myself included, because we're talking a lot about, very discouraging, disheartening things that we should all be fearful of. But what do you say to the people who say, this is the gang that can't shoot straight? And the thing that's going to save us is that they are so incompetent, so inefficient, so chaotic, so backstabbing and infighting that they just won't be able to get the things done that they really want to get done?
Well, I'm just going to reach for, but it's not here, my copy of Project 2025 and say that I think they are prepared this time. They have already done training for people who should come into office. They have all their agenda written out. And I fear that they aren't the gang who can't shoot straight. They were that in the first administration. But on the other hand, I don't think they will actually do things like mass deportations.
Mm-hmm.
We'll know in a few weeks, because he said on day one, is he going to pardon the people who used physical violence on January 6th? Well, we'll know on January 6th or soon thereafter. Is he going to do mass roundups? I don't know. On Just the Facts, I just interviewed my mayor, Daniel Biss, who used to be my state senator and my state rep before that. And because I wanted to know what local government can do to protect against the worst that is coming. Mm-hmm. And local government is planning what can they do to make sure that there isn't invasions of workplaces in their communities. What can they do to prevent against the creation of religion in schools, which is something that I fear greatly. I don't even say, when I learned the Pledge of Allegiance, it did not have the words under God. And when I say the Pledge of Allegiance, I do not say under God. I think that's an invasion of my religious freedom. And I'm not sure how optimistic I am, but I would say to everybody, we must really fight for the next 2 years to change Congress. If the Democrats can take control of the House and the Senate, that will be a guardrail that we don't have now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's essential. So, yes, President Trump will be there for 4 years, barring a health incident. But he can veto legislation, but he can't pass legislation if he doesn't have that control of the House and Senate. So that's the first task before us, is to start working on, and local elections too, because we now see how important school boards are, water reclamation districts. Those are going to be key to protecting each community. And we also need to work on, how do we get the facts to be understood? How do we communicate? And I think we need to use different channels of communication, not just mainstream media. We need to be going on TikTok and podcasts to communicate facts. So I think those are some of the things that are in front of us now. And I think that we're up to the task. We weren't the majority vote this time, and we must make a difference in voting.
Yeah. No, I agree with you so much. And I think what you said about we're going to know soon is so spot on. I wrote a piece a week or so ago about that, in that he's made so many day one promises that we're going to see very soon how much bluster this is and what's real and what's not. And, 60 days from now, we might all be looking at each other going like, yeah, it's crazy, but it's not. Like, I mean, these guys can't tie their own shoelaces. I mean, he was president once. What did he get done then? I know things are different. I get that. And I agree. Project 2025, the players are different. The table is set differently. But there's just chaos from top to bottom with him and his cabinet. And who knows? And we're going to know really soon. We're going to know about the Middle East. We're going to know about the pardons. We're going to know about it all, the deportations. But to your most important point, 2026 is the key. That's the game changer. So I think Democrats, I love them. I'm one, but we libtards got to stop whining and focus on 26. Because even the Trump people are like, we got to get our stuff done within 18 months, because I think they know that 26 is not.
I think there's a lot for action right now. I've just gone on an advisory board for the American Constitution Society, and I am going to push for them to become the Liberal Federalist Society, to have a list of appointments for judges ready for when the Democrats take the presidency again. And we'll have to see. And I think there needs to be changes, like the emoluments clause needs to have an enforcement provision put in it. The Supreme Court needs ethics that are enforceable. There are so many things that we can work on in the next 2 years and hopefully make the change that's necessary to implement those in 4.
Absolutely. Jill, I could talk with you for hours, which means you'll have to come back.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on. This was great. And next few months are going to be crazy. So we'll look forward to having you come back.
Let's keep the faith.
Right on. All righty. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Andy.
All right. It's time for Just Jeff. Jeff, Happy New Year.
Hi. Yeah, Happy New Year. And I'm really excited to be back. I haven't been on for so long. I feel like I've been on vacation.
Well, you've been doing that whole tour across the country, selling out stadiums. You're a busy man.
So what I want to say, there were several things I was going to talk about in terms of if I was on last week, but it's not. And so I think the main thing that was on my mind was, I don't know if you guys...
He just loves to rub that in, doesn't he?
No, I
Well, you have your moment now, Dad. Go.
I'm focusing on Jimmy Carter. The funeral, I'm sure you saw some, but some of it just blew me away. I noticed that Obama and Trump were sitting next to each other, and then they were chatting. It was very hard for me to believe that. But Pence was there, but he was behind him. I thought they would have nothing to do, with each other. But I was wrong, because they actually met and shook hands, which really blew me away. I didn't think that would ever happen. So you guys had some optimism. You're going to think that I'm super optimistic or perhaps super crazy. And that is, I expect Trump to cause all sorts of hell-ish and do all sorts of hellish, unpredictable, nasty things. However, I did observe the way he was listening and focusing on what was going on yesterday, all the tributes to Carter. And I think part of his ego, part of his narcissism is he really thinks he can go down in history as one of the great presidents. In fact, I know he wants to have his face up there on Mount Rushmore.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's between a 1% and 5% chance, which means basically no chance, almost no chance, that he will modify and he won't be as outlandish as we all expect him to. I wouldn't put any money on it, but I think that
you might be right.
Impossible.
Hardly unlikely, but you may be right.
And I thought it over, and maybe the last day of his presidency, if he lives enough, he could say, you know what, I really did lose the 2020 election. That's also not likely to happen.
I wouldn't bet your Social Security check on that, Jeff.
And I wouldn't even bet my Bippy on that.
All right, we'll talk to you next time.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
See you.
Bye, Dad.
Bye.
This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.